Thomas Creddy and a neighbor stopped on the trail above William's cabin, watching him stack black bricks against the wall.
You building a fortress out of mud, McInnes. You think that'll keep you warm when the drifts pile to the roof?
The other man laughed, but William didn't flinch. They descended the slope, curious and scornful, their boots kicking dust as they came closer.
Every man with sense is cutting firewood. You'll burn your coat before Christmas and die of stubbornness.
William didn't answer. His hands, black with peat, placed another brick with deliberate care, as if the mockery were just wind. They said, stacking black turf around his walls was madness, until it outlasted every fire.
They'll see. The cold won't care about their laughing. It never has.
The dark wall rose, brick by brick, as the men finally turned away, their laughter swallowed by the pines. William kept stacking. 3 miles west of the cabin, in a hollow the town called Worthless Muck, William's day began before the sun touched the mountains. His long peat spade cut into the black earth, lifting bricks that smelled of ancient rainwater and rot.
Black gold, she called it. She said it had heated her homeland for 1,000 years.
Thomas found him there, standing ankle-deep in the bog, his flat cap dark with sweat, the dog lying in the grass.
McInnes, you are still at this? That muck won't burn. It'll smother your fire and choke you with smoke.
It'll burn. Not like your wood, but it'll burn.
Come cut cordwood with the rest of us. I am telling you for your own good. You'll freeze.
I've my reasons, old reasons.
Thomas walked away through the marsh grass, shaking his head. William didn't watch him go. By late summer, the drying racks behind his cabin held rows of dark bricks, dense and hardening, while the woodpiles of the doubters rose high and pale. When the bricks were fully cured, William began carrying them to the cabin's west wall, one careful armload at a time. His hands had learned the weight, the way each block settled into the growing barrier, with a soft, solid sound. He'd placed the wall where the winter wind drove hardest, a shield of dried earth that would burn as slowly as it protected. Thomas Creddy rode by with a neighbor, and the laughter started before they reined in.
You'll freeze behind your dirt, McInnes. That wall won't stop a breeze.
They don't know, Grim. They don't know.
The neighbor slapped his knee and laughed, but William's hands never slowed, stacking another brick with the same deliberate patience.
Listen, you stubborn fool. When the snow is waist deep and your chimney is cold, don't come begging for our wood.
William didn't answer. He laid another brick, and the dog's tail thumped softly on the packed earth. The dark wall rose higher, brick by brick, and the mockery became a daily ritual. On market day, William drove his cart into the settlement, the dog trotting beside. The whispers began the moment he was seen. Outside the trading post, Thomas stood with a cluster of men. Martha Creddy watched with something close to pity.
Poor man. He's lost his wits, working that mud while winter's coming.
I'll wager a sack of flour he doesn't last beyond January.
The men laughed. William passed them without a word and entered the store. He bought grain, tea, and nails. The storekeeper took his coins in silence.
The old ways have outlived colder men than these.
He drove home under a pale sky, the wall of turf nearly complete against the west side of the cabin. Inside, he stored the grain and checked his reserve of dry bricks stacked beside the stove. Smoke rose thin from the chimney. William McInnes was ready. The town was not. The first hard frost came in the last week of October, silvering the bog grass and turning the dark turf bricks cold as iron. William placed the final brick high on the west wall, locking the barrier against the coming cold.
He called it the Windward Wall. His grandmother had another name.
Then he turned and began carrying bricks inside, piling them in neat rows beside the stove until the reserve climbed to the rafters. Across the valley, the Creddy men swung axes in the frost, their woodpile growing tall and pale under the bare maples.
That fool McInnes will be burning his coat before we run through half our cordwood.
But at William's cabin, the dog had grown restless, circling the turf wall and whining at the northern sky. When the first flakes fell, small and dry on the wind, the dog fell silent and pressed close to the door. William stood in the falling snow, his flat cap whitening, and looked at the dark wall one last time. Then he went inside, banked his stove with a brick of peat, and waited. The snow fell without pause, and winter settled over the valley like a patient enemy. Outside, the west wind howled, but the dark turf wall broke its teeth before it reached the logs.
The old ones knew. The cold is in the moving air, not the still earth.
At the Creddy homestead, Thomas swung his axe into frozen wood, the logs slick with ice and reluctant to catch.
The house is colder than last winter. We're burning twice the wood for half the heat.
The wood's wet. It'll dry. McInnes is probably huddled over a smoky pile of mud.
I've seen his chimney smoke thin and steady. That man hasn't frozen yet.
While others scrambled, William's routine was methodical. At dusk, he carried another brick inside, the door spilling warm light onto the snow. The peat smoldered through the night with a low, slow heat that never surged and never died. Thomas watched his own woodpile shrinking. The doubt, a cold seed in his chest. A gale swept from the ridges, driving snow sideways like buckshot and shaking the pines to their roots. But the turf wall deadened the wind before it touched the logs, absorbing the storm's teeth. Inside, William sat by the stove and opened a small leather notebook, its pages brown with age.
Her sketches of the bog, the spade, the racks, 1,000 years in faded ink.
Thomas braved the gale to inspect his woodpile and found it scattered, the logs frozen together in a useless heap. He trudged toward the ridge above William's cabin, intending to see how the fool was faring in the storm. As he neared the hollow, the howl softened. The wind seemed to falter and die against the dark wall. He stared. The wall deadened the wind, and the air around the cabin was strangely still.
It's luck. The wind shifted. That mud can't be doing this.
Thomas pulled his coat tight and stumbled home through the gale, the doubt in his chest grown into something colder. January tightened its grip. The valley woodpiles shrank from mountains to molehills, and the cold crept under doors. In the Creddy lean-to, the stack of split logs was down to a single row, pitiful beneath the frost.
What are we going to burn next month, Thomas? The children can't sleep through the cold.
We'll make do. Always have. Go back inside before you freeze.
At William's cabin, a brick of peat glowed in the stove. The dog stretched on the warm floor, untroubled.
One brick lasts the night. The wall outside keeps the rest. She was right.
At the general store, talk turned grim. A neighbor said his wife was burning furniture. The storekeeper had no oil left.
My woodpile's holding. We're fine. No need for McInnes's mud, but not for long. And that fool McInnes, he hasn't bought a stick. How is he still warm?
The cold deepened. The knowledge that William's mud bricks were outlasting wood ate at Thomas like a slow frost. 3 mornings later, a neighbor named Cooper swung his axe into a kitchen chair, splitting it for firewood on the frozen ground.
First one, then another. How long before it's my chair under that axe?
Thomas wrapped his scarf tighter and walked the hard trail to William McInnes's cabin, not to ask, but to see. The dog rose barking, but William opened the door, the warm air drawing Thomas in like a confession.
You look cold, Thomas. Come in for tea.
Thomas stepped inside. The stove glowed, the dog settled, and the wall of peat bricks stacked to the rafters seemed to swallow the room.
He's got enough fuel for 3 winters, and I called him a fool.
They said little. Thomas drank his tea, rubbed the dog's ears, and left with the cold deeper in his bones than when he came.
You were at McInnes's place. Did he have wood hidden? How is he warm?
He's burning that mud, and it's working, but I won't beg him. Not yet.
On the third week of January, the wind shifted south and the air turned soft as a liar's promise. The town took it for salvation. Men sharpened axes and oiled saws, eager for fresh wood.
Don't celebrate yet, Grim. A thaw in deep winter is deceit.
That night, the temperature plunged. A freezing rain began to fall, coating every branch and twig in a shell of ice. By dawn, the forest had become a crystal tomb. Trees locked in ice, branches fused together like glass. Thomas set out with his axe, but the blade skidded off the frozen bark, throwing shards of ice into his face.
It's no use. The whole forest is a block of ice. We can't touch it.
By midday, the woodcutters returned with empty hands and frozen hope. William stood on his doorstep, the dark wall behind him, and watched the silent forest. The wood was sealed away. Only the black turf, dry and ready, remained within reach. The frozen dusk found Thomas Creddy on William McInnes's doorstep, his pride scoured away by the ice that locked the forest.
Mac Innes. I never thought I'd say this. How much for a day's warmth?
A sack of grain. And you'll never mock the mud again.
Done.
William reached inside the cabin and handed Thomas 7 bricks of dark peat, dense and dry as old wood. Thomas carried the heavy bricks home, his arms full of the thing he had ridiculed all summer.
You went to him. You swallowed your pride, thank God.
That night, a brick of William's peat burned in the Creddy stove, the slow heat filling the cold corners of the house.
It's hot. Hotter than wood. That man, he knew all along.
The first trade had been made, and the lifeline of the settlement now passed through William McInnes's black mud wall. By dawn, the news had spread like thaw. A line of sleds and wagons crept through the snow toward William McInnes's cabin. They brought grain, blankets, nails, anything they could spare, and they asked for the black bricks that burned like stone.
A week's fuel for a sack of grain. No more, no less.
Each brick was a slow-burning promise, 7 hours of steady heat from a black block that had once been called worthless muck.
Let me help. Old Mrs. Cobb can't lift those herself.
Thomas, the loudest scoffer, became William's hands, carrying bricks to those too weak to reach the wall themselves. The wall shrank day by day, a black barricade dismantled by men who had once mocked its very existence.
She called it black gold. Now they see why.
The mud bricks that were worthless now bought more than a man's wages in a month. By the end of the week, the cabin yard looked like a market, and William McInnes, the fool, held the valley's only fire in his hands. By the time the snow stopped falling, the great black wall was less than a third of its height, a low dark band along the cabin's west face.
If I give more than 2 bricks a day, I won't make it to the thaw.
A woman came at dusk, a sick child wrapped against her chest, her face hollow with cold and desperation.
Take a week's worth. No trade. Just keep that child warm.
He's giving away his own chance. It's not greed, it's something deeper.
The woman choked a thanks and disappeared into the falling night, leaving William with 1 brick less than safety demanded. Inside, the stove burned low and William opened his grandmother's notebook, his thumb resting on a thin braid of white hair pressed among the pages.
You taught me well, but I wish they'd listened before the ice came.
Outside, Thomas stood in the dark, the words he'd heard through the chink in the logs searing into his memory. The black wall had dwindled to a doorstep, but the weight of William's secret pressed heavier than any winter. The mercury plunged to a depth no one had recorded. Water froze before it hit the floor. Across the valley, families huddled around peat bricks burning blue and slow, the only warmth in frozen houses.
32 bricks left. 2 a day will see me through the thaw, if I burn no more.
A knock came at midnight. 2 men stood outside, holding their last sack of oats, their eyes hollow. William traded 3 bricks for their grain, his hand trembling from the arithmetic of survival. Before dawn, Thomas Creddy came alone, a sack of grain over his shoulder.
This isn't for trade. It's for what I said in summer. Take it.
A trade, not charity. 1 brick for the sack. I'll not have you owing me.
They sat by the stove and shared a jar of cider, the silence between them warmer than words. Dawn found the valley alive. Smoke rose from every chimney. William still had his black gold. February dragged on, and the great black wall was down to 2 rows, a dark ledger of cold days remaining. He knelt and counted the bricks like a miser counting coins, his dog's tail thumping the frozen ground.
18 bricks. If I stop trading now, I'll see the thaw, but I'll be the last man with a fire.
Thomas, Creddy, and a handful of men gathered by the cabin, their faces asking the question they couldn't voice.
1 brick. Per family, per week. No more. We share the cold until the thaw.
We'll do what you say, Macinus. You've kept us alive this far.
The town council that had once wagered against him now deferred to his word, as if he were the only man who understood the winter.
We were all blind. The whole valley owes you a debt it can never repay.
William's face remained still, but something softened behind his eyes, a buried grief, or perhaps a faint, tired vindication. He turned back to the wall, the last bricks dark under his hand, and the village's fate balanced on his choice. March came with a softer wind. Ice cracked from the trees, falling like old glass onto the softening snow. Inside, William counted 5 bricks. The great wall outside was only a dark stain where the peat had shielded the wood from wind and wet.
Macinus, the Cooper baby came early. They've nothing left to burn.
He lifted his final brick and pressed it into Thomas's hands.
This is the last. Use it for the child.
You are out. You gave everything. What will you burn?
By midday, water dripped from every roof. The forest shed its ice with a sound like chimes. The families blinked in the sun. Macinnis's west wall was dark and sound. Their own logs were split and warped. One farmer touched his split timbers, ran his hand along the frost damage, then stared at Macinnis's unmarked wall.
Macinnis, we owe you our lives. Now tell us, how did you know?
The crowd fell silent. William looked at Thomas, then turned and stepped inside his cabin, the dog at his heels. He returned carrying a leather notebook, worn and darkened by years, and opened it for all to see. The pages were filled with drawings of spades, drying racks, and walls of turf blocking the wind.
This was my grandmother's, from the Isle of Lewis. In that treeless land, peat kept her people alive. She told me they called it black gold. Don't forget, I never did.
Forgive us, William. We called you a fool. But you were the wisest of us all.
I was the worst. I ridiculed you, and you saved my family.
Thomas laid his hand on William's shoulder. The 2 men stood together in the thawing yard, the winter's end around them.
The mud held. That's enough.
The notebooks circled the crowd, and the black turf that had been worthless became the valley's memory. William Macinnis had remembered what everyone else forgot. By the next morning, the crowd had drifted home, but William took Thomas by the arm and led him west toward the bog. He handed Thomas a long iron spade at the edge of the bog, the morning mist still clinging to the dark peat.
Cut straight down along the grain. Then slice underneath. Let the water drain before you lift.
Like this.
Aye, you'll learn.
The dog splashed through the shallow edge of the bog, barking at a startled curlew, and Thomas laughed for the first time in months. By evening, other villagers had come, carrying spades and old bread as offerings, their silence a truer thanks than any speech.
Next winter, we'll all be ready.
Thomas stacked the first damp brick beside William's own hands, and the 2 men worked in the fading light without words. The bog that had been called worthless muck now stretched before them, dark and ready, a promise renewed. High summer came. and the bog teemed with villagers, spades flashing, voices carrying, the dark peat rising in neat stacks.
Let them dry 2 weeks before you stack. Patience is the secret she taught me.
We listened once. We'll listen again.
The drying racks, once solitary, now held bricks from a dozen hands, the dark blocks warm in the sun. Against William's cabin, the west wall grew again, layered brick by brick, but now other hands built beside his own. Thomas placed a brick, Martha another, and the dog dozed in the sun, indifferent to the labor of redemption. The wall that had been a joke now stood as a covenant, written in black turf and renewed by memory.
She'd have smiled, the old knowledge spreading like heather across the hills.
By autumn, every homestead had its own dark stack. The madness had become the method. William walked his dog along the finished wall, and the valley smelled of peat smoke and peace. Evening settled gold over the valley. William sat on his porch, the dark peat wall solid beside him like a promise kept. Thomas climbed the steps, a bottle of whiskey in his hands. No trade, no debt, just a friend.
To the summer we doubted you, and to every winter after.
A rare, slow smile creased William's face. He took the bottle and poured 2 measures. They drank in silence, watching the sun sink behind the pines, the dogs stretched at their feet. The peat smoke curled from the chimney, the same slow smoke that had saved them all. The dog thumped its tail in its sleep, and Thomas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Martha passed on the road and waved, her shawl bright against the fading light. In the end, the mud bricks that everyone laughed at had built a memory, passed down through blood and bog, that no winter could erase. William set down his glass and watched the stars appear, one by one, over the dark wall. The bog lay dark and wet in the summer sun, and the spades rose and fell without rest. The drying racks filled again, the black bricks curing in the warm wind. A promise renewed. William's hand rested on the new wall, rough and familiar, warm from the long afternoon light. Inside, the leather notebook lay open on the table, the faint scent of peat and memory rising from its pages. The chimney breathed its slow smoke into the gathering dusk, and the dark wall stood watch as it had through the long winter. The cabin grew small in the frame of the valley, a dark shape against the green hills and the pale evening sky, and the dog barked once, a sharp sound that echoed for a moment, and then was gone. They said stacking black turf around his walls was madness, until it outlasted every fire. And beneath the black wall, the valley remembered, the bog never forgot. In its dark depth lay a knowledge older than the pines, older than the first axe that bit into the new world's trees, a knowledge that had crossed the sea in a grandmother's hands and rooted in the black earth of a distant valley. In the highlands, they had called it black gold, and for 1,000 winters it had kept the hearths alive. When the ice sealed the forest and the woodpiles failed, that ancient fire had once again become the difference between silence and survival. William McInnes had simply remembered what everyone else forgot, a truth as elemental as the earth itself. This story was inspired by the heritage knowledge of Scottish peat cutting that kept the highlands alive for centuries. It is a testament to the wisdom carried in old hands and the quiet endurance of the black turf. As the valley settled into its new rhythm, the spades cut deep and the racks filled high, the memory would not be lost again. In the end, the mud bricks that everyone laughed at had built a wall of fire that no winter could breach, and beneath the black wall, the valley remembered.